Uh, Before I start my report, I'd like to show you some of the books that were lent to me by people in this group and other places, and I'm very grateful to you all. This is the library book, UKIYO, 250 Years of Japanese Art. Library is a great place to borrow books. I know all of you have had that good experience. Gail Baldwin lent me this one, Masterpieces of UKIYO. Excuse me, Masterpieces of Japanese Prints. She's in Florida, I think. Then we have a book lent by Peggy Johnson. The Great Wave, the Influence of Japanese Woodcuts on French Impressionism. Robin's brother, Paul, passed on last fall, and he was a great traveler, and he had spent a lot of time in Japan. So when we visited him last summer, he heard what my report was to be about. He said, "Oh, I have some books in my library that would be useful to you." So I have a bunch of books from Paul. The 53 Stations of the Tokaido. And that's about Hiroshiga, an artist. This is about another artist, Hokusai. A general book of Japanese art, of cultural appreciation, and a wonderful little poetry book, The Floating World. I think you can see I enlarged the picture there. Can everyone see? Myra, can you see it? Sim Yaviner, I don't need to introduce you, but we're glad you're here too. He came last week, and so it's wonderful that he was willing to come over here from Glastonbury again. Before starting my report, one thing more I want to say. I do not speak Japanese. We've been in Japan, but I do not speak Japanese. So I apologize in advance if I don't pronounce anything right. Anybody here speak Japanese? Good. And, some of you I know have been in Japan. If you've been in Japan, raise your hands. Yeah, quite a few. Go on this side. Well, today my subject is UKIYO, printed on the top up here, UKIYOE. UKIYO is the name given to woodblock prints made in Japan in the 18th and 19th century. Often when people think of Japanese woodblock prints, the one that comes to mind is the Great Wave over here. That's probably the one that people are most familiar with. Or else they think of pictures of beautiful women. And actually, there's a wide variety of subjects of the UKIYO, which include all aspects of Japanese culture, including wrestlers and theater and nature, landscapes, a real wide variety, though it started out originally with pictures of beautiful women and kabuki theater. First, I need to give a little background. The 250 years from mid-1600s to the end of 1800s was a time of really a great upheaval in Japan. The government and the culture really changed in a time that was known as the Edo period, E-D-O. It was a time also that Japan isolated itself from the rest of the world. So the Japanese art during that time was not influenced by art from other places, which is interesting. And though theoretically the emperor in Kyoto governed, but the shoguns actually did the real governing. And shoguns were military governors, and they really made the changes in the economic, political, and cultural Japan of that time. And they governed from what's now Tokyo, but it was called Edo then, Edo, E-D-O. So when I use the word Edo, you can think of Tokyo. The patterns of wealth and the social life changed at that time. There came to be a middle class that had money and for pleasures and time to travel. Quite different from before, where it was only the rich who could do that. And their lives were reflected in all these prints that I'm going to show you. You may be wondering why the prints are called ukiyo-e. Well, I tell you, I wondered quite a while too. It's translated to mean pictures of the floating world. The easy part of it is the end. The E in the end means pictures. So if you know Japanese, you know that often that word E is used at the end of an adjective or another word to mean pictures. For example, mishi-oi means pictures of renowned places, and beni-e means pink pictures. So you've learned something about Japanese language, and that's all I know of it. The first part of ukiyo-e is harder to define. It comes from a Buddhist word, ukiyo, which refers to the transitory life of human existence. Somehow, ukiyo was used in Japan to refer to the transitory delights of visiting brothels and theaters. In fact, many of the early ukiyo-e prints were of prostitutes, then known as courtesans, or else kabuki actors. In the city of Edo, there was a special area called Yoshiwara set aside for such transitory or floating pleasures. I have a couple of prints here which helped me understand that floating world better. I'm sorry that you'll have to come up at the end to look at the details of it, but the one on the top is boating, on the right here is boating and fireworks on the Sumida River, a river that goes right through that Yoshiwara entertainment district. And the gaily lighted boats are carrying people from one district to another. Perhaps the boats were another reason for their calling it the floating world. Then down below is a picture of a kabuki theater. Theaters were a large part of the entertainment in those days. And here is an amazing print showing hundreds of people, each with their faces individually drawn. You'll just have to come up and see them. I found it quite amazing to look at it. At the time, the Japanese artists, some of them were working on perspective. So I think you'll see real perspective here in the theater. Eventually the word ukiyo came to refer to the wide range of subject matter shown on the charts I have here. Now, do a little changing around here. Oops. Oh, all right, that'll be nice. Take it. Well, I'm going down there anyway. I have to get number 2 here. originally wood blocks were just black and white, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about how color came to the wood blocks. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the process of making wood blocks. Some of you went to St. Joseph College a couple of weeks ago in our group trip, and we had a report on all kinds of prints. And I was so happy when the first thing she talked about was wood blocks. She had some wood blocks to show us, and went through the whole process. As she showed us, printmaking has 3 stages. First, designing the image, drawing the picture, carving it into a wood block, and printing from the wood block to the paper. Each stage in Japan usually involved a different skilled person. The artist made the detailed drawing. The carver cut through the paper drawing into the wood, leaving parts in relief. That's the hard part. The printer then inked the wood block, pressing a piece of paper on it, and then rubbed the paper with a special instrument, and many prints could be made from that one wood block, maybe several thousand. Now, I did try out doing wood blocks once. And I did it the easy way, but I'll show you. I copied this from a Chinese plate that we have in the house. And you can see the lines are just white. Now, if I had done it the way they do it in Japan, I would have carved it out so that the lines are in relief. You have to cut all the wood out from behind, and when you print it, the black lines show up. But I could never have done all that. But anyway, it was a way to find out how this works. And I have the wood block, which I think I'll pass around in a minute. You see, this is my wood block, and when you see it, you'll see it just has lines kind of scratched into it. If I had done it properly, it would have turned out like this. This happens to be a rubber print. And I'm going to pass that around too. This, if it were wood, would all be cut out from the back. So you roll the paint on with this, and you print it onto a piece of paper. So let's pass around some pictures that you can see more closely, and this box with the wood block in it. Should we pass this on this side, and maybe we'll give this to them. Shall we give this over there to them? Now, at first, these were just black and white, and then on the left here, one of the early ones were hand-colored, like Currier and Ives prints were hand-colored. When we studied about Currier and Ives here, I remember we talked about women sitting around the table coloring the pictures, and it could have been a similar way. This one is Young Lovers by Mount Fuji. It was hand-colored. The middle one, someone got the bright idea that you could have a new wood block for each color. So each color was especially made to fit onto the same place. And at first they had mostly just green and pink, as this one here. Even that was complicated. But imagine over here, that was full color, sometimes as many as 15 to 20 colors. Can you imagine doing all that? But it turns out beautifully, and we don't even think what a lot of work. We just think what a pretty picture. I want you to just take a look at the last picture over there. The lower part of it is a lovely picture that we'll talk about later. But notice the shading in the sky that gives that soft look. They didn't do that with another woodblock. They rubbed it, as the woman over in St. Joseph's showed us. They have a kind of pad of ink that they rubbed it down. So that adds something new. That was toward the end of the woodblocks. Now, what I need then is this one, but I just... Okay. In the early years of UKIYO, most of the 1700s, most of the prints were of beautiful women and of kabuki actors and wrestlers, but always there were some nature pictures. Now let's first look at beautiful women prints. As you look at these pictures, think of the difficulty of making fine lines. The line has to be in relief, not just a scratch. Also remember that each color has to be a new woodblock, even for the small designs in the fabric. This woman is the courtesan Hana Ogi, a very famous woman who is the subject of many ukiyo-e prints. Portraits of just the head were kind of unusual, but I chose it because I wanted you to see the hairdo. It was a very luxurious style that they admired. There are 3 combs and several beautiful hairpins. Wonder how you'd like to do that every morning. That would be quite a project, wouldn't it? On the top left here, there's a courtesan and her attendant on a moonlit veranda. 2 popular activities of the Edo period were playing musical instruments, and her attendant has a musical instrument. And since this is part of a series on poets, I assume the writing on the top was poetry. And I don't think anyone can disagree, because none of us read Japanese, but I think it must be. On the lower left is another woman, Takashima Ohisa, another popular beauty of the 1790s with her typical fan. And over here, cherry blossom viewing, something we're looking forward to, aren't we, after this cold winter. And often there are prints of people viewing the cherry blossoms. But notice the beautiful clothes on these people. Many of the women bought these prints so they could see the latest fashions. So all of them are just wonderful clothes. Down below, cranes returning home. Here a man and a woman are admiring the birds as they fly into their window. It's one of a series, indoor views of famous birds. As we know, Japanese people love nature, and putting a bird in the picture was a way to add nature. As I look at these ukiyo-e prints, I realize they are beautiful art, and I'm amazed at the artistic and technical skills. The artists have idealized women in general, but in my opinion, probably over-romanticized the life of the courtesans. another subject is the UKIYO theater, and Peggy, I can do this. Oh, all right. As I showed you before, are you able to see over there? Yeah. We hope we get her. Somebody could come over here maybe and see that. Yeah, all right, good. My first chart showed you that packed theater, reflecting on the fact that Edo had become the cultural center of Japan. On the left in this poster, you can see prints of individual actors. And everybody knew the names of all those actors. It was important to them to know their names. And people used to collect prints of their favorite actors and buy little booklets of actors. Like I suppose nowadays, people might buy a movie magazine. And as you look at them, think again of the number of woodblocks that might need to be used for all these different colors. Now, sumo wrestlers, just like actors, were very popular. Each one was known by name, and his life as well as his career was followed closely. The wrestler in the rather startling checked outfit in the middle print is not in a wrestling match, but strolling along the street in the entertainment district to view the fireworks. The artist, Kunisada, who did this print, is the same one who made the prints over here, and you can see he really loved the bright colors. Now we'll move to another sample of prints. Here we are with nature. Wild geese in the moonlight and rabbits in the moonlight. Kind of soft glow over them. I really love that, the feeling of those pictures. Now, and the rest of the day I'm going to talk about two very famous artists, Japanese artists. And the first one is Hokusai. The artist of the Hokusai was most famous for his great wave print and the popularization of landscape prints, but he was also responsible for other innovations in subject matter, style, and technique. His lifetime and his work coincided with the golden age of ukiyo-e. Before I get into the details of his life, I must tell you that he was a very eccentric artist. Though he lived in Edo all his life, he changed his residence 93 times. Probably, as the book noted, evidence of his restless artistic spirit. Well, he was very creative in his work, and every time he changed his style, he would change his name. He often surprised people with his actions. My book about Hokusai tells a couple of stories about him that I'd like to read to you. So this is the story. The governing shogun summoned Hokusai and another artist to come to his residence and produce works on the spot for his amusement. Hokusai, as might well be expected, responded in an unusual way. The day came, and Hokusai, not in the least awed, entered the shogun's august presence carrying a basket. He stretched out a long roll of paper on the floor, drew a few dark lines on it with a brush, and then took a chicken out of the basket. As those present watched with bated breath, he coated the chicken's feet with vermilion ink. and turned it loose on the paper. The chicken ran all over the paper, leaving a trail of footprints as it went. Hokusai kneeled before the shogun and announced the title, Autumn Maple Leaves Drifting on the Tatsuda River. Then he left, and the incident made him even more widely known. Another story shows his lack of interest in money or worldly affairs. Whenever a publisher came to bring him his fees and found him hard at work, Hokusai would wave in the direction of the wastepaper basket and tell him to put the money in it. And those who came to collect debts would have to delve in the same basket for their money. I think I'd like to know Hokusai. Now back to his actual career. He was born in Edo in 1760 and as a youth became apprenticed to a ukiyo-e engraver where he learned the techniques of carving wood blocks for book illustrations and prints. This combined with his fondness for sketching was a wonderful background for a great career as a ukiyo-e artist. At the age of 19, he became a pupil of another artist in his Shunsho school. Then he tried the styles of other artists, and during those years, he illustrated several books of poetry, and he also made prints in some of the traditional ukiyo-e subjects. However, creative as he was, he kept trying out new techniques and introducing new subjects, especially landscapes with scenes of people in ordinary life. These began to replace the traditional ukiyo-e themes of brothels and theater particularly, and at the same time, the public had a new interest in traveling in Japan. Soon other artists made books of pictures of parts of Japan, and they were used like travel guides. You might buy a book of these like you'd go to AIA to get a travel guide. The period of 30 years that began in 1800 when Hokusai was 40 became the height of his career, a time when his style matured and it was capped by the completion of his masterpiece, 36 Views of Mount Fuji. And I have samples of this booklet up here on the chart that I'm going to show you. Each one has Mount Fuji in it. And actually it took him 10 years to make that Fuji series. So it took a long time and a lot of care. First, let's take a more detailed look at this print. This is officially called the Great Wave of Kanagawa. It's from the series 36 Views of Mount Fuji. Here's the wave. 2 boats full of people. And in the distance, Mount Fuji. The design is very bold and original and very satisfying to look at it. It also has a kind of an emotional feeling because there are people in those boats and they are in danger. And even Mount Fuji seems fragile and ready to be engulfed. We're reminded of the mighty forces at work in nature and the artist's sympathy for those who might be affected. Does it make you think of the tsunami wave? Now we have new thoughts about waves. The next is on the lower left, Red Fuji. This is another famous print in the Mount Fuji series, entirely different from the one with the wave. The color red, did that surprise you? We think of Mount Fuji as red, blue, white, or black. And unusual for Hokusai's landscapes, there are no people in this, probably adding to a quiet, peaceful feeling. The color and the design are very simple too, all joined together to show nature when it is most serene, as compared to when it's violent. Those are interesting pair there. On the upper right is Umezawa in Sagami Province. This is early dawn on the mountain, and the mountain is shown with pink clouds around it as Hokusai began to use his beautiful shading. The cranes are here, and 2 are already flying off, giving life to the scene. This is really one of my favorites, and I hope you'll come up and see it more closely. Nakahara in the province of Sagami. In this scene, Hokusai has some peasant figures. Here's a fisherman in the water, a woman with a baby on her back walking across the bridge, and a lot of peasants perhaps walking to the market, conversing with each other. And I think you'll notice that there's a nice balance of people and mountain, neither one dominate. In the lower picture, you're looking in the distance to see Mount Fuji, not there. This instead is a picture of people climbing the mountain, and you can see how rugged it is. Obviously, it's a very vigorous climb, and you can see a bunch of people in the cave up here, probably resting and warming up after the coldness. So we see Mount Fuji in many different ways, and if you look at the book, there are 36 altogether that he has. Peggy, thank you. This is Hokusai continued. I'm showing you some of his nature prints. As we've seen in his Fuji prints, he really cared about nature, and during his life made quite a few different prints. This is early in his life, and this is toward the end. I think you'll see a difference of style. This is Spring, made in the 1780s when he was 24, and it's one of a series of the 4 seasons. The women are admiring the warmer weather and the plum blossoms, just as we hope to be doing in Wethersfield. Since he was younger, this style is very much like some of the other prints we have seen. Here is one later on, which has a blue background and is really quite different. Many woodblock prints were especially made to illustrate poetry. But I'm not sure whether he was thinking of doing this to illustrate poetry, but I happened to find a book The Floating World, a book of poetry which has his picture in it. So I'm going to read the poem to you while you look at the picture up here. A bird that is reared in captivity may live, grow old, and die, and never know that it has wings with which to soar into the sky. That's by a Japanese poet, Oguchi Taiji. On the right, turtles in the water, made when Hokusai was older, and you can see shading and quite different kinds of style there. It's an unusual print of turtles. In Japan, a turtle is a symbol of longevity. It is said that the shell of a really long-lived turtle gets covered with seaweed. From the seaweed on these turtles, I would say these turtles must be very old. Now, Hokusai died at the age of 89 in 1839. He worked right up to the end of his life, wishing even then that he could have another 10 years to complete his goals. He was an artistic genius whose work has been widely appreciated around the world, as well as in Japan. Now we'll move to our other artist, or other. Hiroshige was a student of Hokusai, born in 1797 in Edo, and he showed interest in art as a child. However, he came from a family that had been fire wardens for 3 generations, and being a good son, he followed their footprints. But in a few years, he left the fire warden job and followed his main interest in art. He began his ukiyo-e career illustrating a book of poems about beautiful women. Hiroshige changed to landscape art in 1832 when he was permitted to join a convoy that was escorting the annual gift of horses from the shogun in Edo across Japan to the emperor in Kyoto. They followed a well-traveled route across Japan called Tokaido. Instead of going on 91, you'd go on Tokaido and you wouldn't have a car, you would walk. He must have been a fast worker because in a year and a half, he had completed his famous book, The 53 Stations of the Tokaido. Poet Takesu wrote an introduction to the book, which I'd like to read to you. Hiroshige has sketched in detail not only incidents that he witnessed at the various stations along the way, but also the famous buildings, mountains, rivers, and trees, nor has he omitted the travelers whom he encountered. So vivid are his sketches that anyone who views the prints, even though he may never have seen the Tokaido, will feel he's actually on the road. Hoeido has published the prints that they may be preserved for eternity. The book made him a huge success, just as 36 Views of Mount Fuji had made Hokusai. It shows all 53 stopping places en route. Some were stops where they would stay overnight or have a meal. Other stops were where they had to cross a river or climb a mountain. Hiroshige evidently related well to the travelers that he met along the way, and he shows them in his pictures, and you really do need to see these pictures up close. I have a few of the stopping places right here. This is the beginning of the Tokaido in Edo, in the town of Nihonbashi. It's early morning, the beginning of the trip on the long Tokaido road as they cross the bridge to leave Edo, going by the fishermen who are taking their fish, their catch, into the city market. Below, this is a lake scene, Hakone. The route to Tokaido is varied, sometimes difficult, including some jagged summits, as shown here. Not sure that I would like to try climbing that. The long line of travelers may be the annual procession bringing horses as a gift to the emperor in Kyoto from the governing shogun in Edo. it was this annual procession that the artist Hiroshige was invited to join in 1832. Now, one of my favorite pictures en route. This is a tea house. Two very hungry travelers are happily eating in a tea house in Mariko. When you get up close, you can see their widely opened mouths and their hands reaching out to the innkeeper. The sign up here is the menu for the day, and it includes yam paste and sake, as well as other side dishes. The lower picture here is a snow scene, one of the stops on the route. Snow is falling on the houses, trees, and mountains, and all of them already covered as weary villagers drag their feet through the deep snow. It's a kind of a scene of utter silence, like we might see looking out of our windows here. The picture is considered one of the very best of Hiroshige. And as you look at this picture and the next ones I'm going to show you, notice how Hiroshige uses snow, rain, or moonlight to add atmosphere. The upper picture, these are more of Hiroshige, is Itai Bridge in the Evening Rain. By the shape of the print, what do you think it is? Fan, yeah, yep, it's a fan. Many of the prints were used to make fans. This last year's Hiroshige published many series of landscapes, both of country and city, and the Itai Bridge is part of the series on famous places of Edo. Notice how Hiroshige drew the rain coming down on the umbrellas of the people crossing the bridge and on the boatmen down below. Almost makes you feel wet. The lower print for our last picture today, I chose one of Hiroshige's masterpieces of his late years. It's a triptych, about 3 feet by 2 feet, entitled Kanazawa Under Full Moonlight. It's a panorama of a magnificent scenic spot near Edo. See how even in the night scene, he shows how important human activity is by the boats here and a couple of, it looks like little picnic shelters down there. And there's soft shading in the sky and the beautiful glow of the moon over it all. Hiroshige died in 1858, soon after he finished this beautiful picture. Hiroshige is a master artist like Hokusai, and he was an immediate success in Japan, and now his art is included among the masterpieces of the world. Now to summarize, both Hokusai and Hiroshige lived at the height of the golden age of ukiyo-e. For over 200 years, the prints of ukiyo-e artists had brought to the common people of Japan art in a similar way that Currier and Ives brought art to the common people here in America. Ukiyo-e woodblock printing flourished in Japan from late 1600s to 1800s. However, by the end of the 19th century, newer printing methods and photography replaced the woodblocks, and the subjects of ukiyo-e prints began to be outdated and no longer popular. Around the mid-1850s, Japan was forced by Commodore Perry and U.S. warships to reopen trade with foreign countries after 200 years of isolation. Then ukiyo-e prints, which were no longer popular in Japan, became immensely popular in Europe and the United States. They were sought out by collectors and museums, and influenced artists, especially Impressionists. Here is a painting by the French artist Lautrec. It's in the book that was lent me by Peggy Johnson. And Lautrec was influenced by the way Japanese actors were portrayed. Here is one of his prints on the cover. On the right is a music hall actress who complained vigorously to Lautrec that she didn't like the caricatured look he gave her. And I notice he also has a big hairdo on her hair, her head. Another one by Lautrec. Shows also more influence by the actor Prince of Japan. Here is Jane Averill, the French dancer, very active and lively compared to the Japanese one also. Now, Mary Cassatt was another one influenced. On this side over here on the left is a Japanese print showing a Japanese mother and baby, and the baby's having a bath in the tub. And on this side, Mary Cassatt, influenced by the Japanese print, has a mother and child, and the baby's having a bath in the bathtub. But I noticed that Mary Cassatt had plain, smooth hair on her person, so that she was still using her own thoughts with it. And now the special floating world of Edo is gone, along with the artists who portrayed it. However, through the UKIYO woodblock prints, we can all enter that mysterious land culture of long ago, and I invite you all to come up and do that. Please come up.
What tools do you use when you carved out your, wasn't it like a stylus?
What did I use? What kind of wood or tools? I have a whole box of tools here, but there's one tool that was in there.
Oh, that was the roller.